Help of Hashem, we are learning Sukah Daf Chafei. This is a very important daf. We are addressing the huge topic known as Ha'oisik b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah. And the Mishnah is going to open up speaking about Shluchei mitzvah paturim min ha'sukah, and we're learning our sugya the way most of the Shoinim learn it, and that's linking that the reason why if you have a shliach that's on a mitzvah mission, during the mission, that person is exempt from dwelling in the sukkah. It's based on the principle that ha'oisik b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah. Now, it's self-understood that you have to define better this concept that someone who's occupied in a mitzvah is exempt from other mitzvahs, because, just as an example, that we, thank God, we are talis katan. I'm doing a mitzvah. Are you going to tell that a yid who's wearing a talis katan is, God forbid, exempt from doing other mitzvahs? He's oisik b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah. So there's a lot to speak about from many different angles. We're going to learn a shtickle toisviz that says clearly that the word ha'oisik is not hamakayim. Ha'oisik means when you're occupied in a mitzvah in a way that right now, if you were to do another mitzvah, you would have to stop doing the current one. And that's the pshat, that ha'oisik b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah. It sounds simple, but it's not that simple. As we will unpackage the sugya, we're going to learn the sources for this rule. We're going to see that the way we define ha'oisik b'mitzvah isn't only if someone is preoccupied with a mitzvah, begashmius, doing physically, but it's even if there is a mental preoccupation. Even there, we say that if this person would be obligated to do another mitzvah, they would have to somehow retake back their mental preoccupation. They're not obligated to do that. And that's going to lead us into a sugya regarding avelus, that we're going to learn on today's daf, that an avel who's in mourning, who's preoccupied with sadness, he is obligated in keeping all the mitzvahs, with the exception of tefillin. Halacha l'maisa, how this works out today, we say that by the oinen, and there's even scenarios where if a person already finished preparing all that's needed to bury, and for whatever reason the burial did not yet happen, so we have some people that we know that have a told to bitzina, they should be wearing their tefillin. This is a sugya that we will learn in much greater detail, Masechtas Moed Katan. But we will learn a Gavaldik Gemara Rashi, who writes here on Sukah Chafei that a person is not chayiv. There's no mitzvah to have tsar when a person lost a relative. It's a natural thing, but there's no mitzvah in the tsar. There is mitzvah in doing the things an aval is mechoyev to do. But as we will see, that the preoccupation of tsar by avelus is a non-mitzvah. And when do we say that if a person is preoccupied, even only mentally, in a mitzvah, are they exempt from a mitzvah? If it's exactly that, if they are preoccupied in a mitzvah. But other tirdois, other mental preoccupations, which make it difficult to do a mitzvah, so we have to make the effort and do the mitzvah. Now, what we will learn, again, Gemara Rashi, hopefully we'll get there, on Daf Chafei Amid Beis, is we're going to learn about Hassan and Shushvinin v'chol b'nei hachupa. We're going to learn about halachas regarding the Hassan himself. Shushvinin in our context doesn't mean the two unterfeeders. Shushvinin means the groom's close friends. B'nei hachupa, this Chazal, chupa doesn't mean what you think about a chupa. When people got married in the times of Chazal, they would have a location. You can even call it a home where the Hassan and Kala lived for 7 days. And there is where all of the Sheva Brachas were celebrated. So the Hassan and Kala stayed put, and it was a 7-day celebration. And whoever is involved in that celebration are people that are involved in a mitzvah. And we're going to see whether they are exempt or whether they are not exempt of certain mitzvahs. And as Rashi will teach the Gemara in Daf Chafei Amid Beis, that really this whole principle of ha'oisik b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah is subject to a machloekes tanoim, at least according to Rashi. Chavra, let's start the Mishnah. Daf Chafei, the Mishnah says, the Mishnah shluchei mitzvah, those who are on a mitzvah mission, paturim min ha'sukah, they are exempt from sukkah. Let's read inside the Rashi. Shluchei mitzvah, hoilchei baderech mitzvah. For example, a person is going to learn Torah. A person is going lahagbil penei rabbi. A person is going on a trip to the Poidin Shvuyin. Says Rashi, Peturim in Sukah. Listen to the words of Rashi. Va'afilu b'shas chaniyasan. Not only when they are actually physically traveling, but even if they're going from point A to point B, they're overnighting in a location while they are resting, but they are still in middle of their mission. Even then, they are exempt from the Sukkah. Now hold on. Let's go. Keep your finger in the Mishnah. Look inside the second Tosfos. And as we spoke out in the intro, this concept, Shluchei Mitzvah, Ho'il Chibedvar Mitzvah, and he quotes what Rashi writes. They are pater from the Sukkah even b'shas chaniyasan. And I want to scoot down a couple of lines. Frek Tosfos v'tema im yecholim l'kayim shneim amai peturin. The atu adam sheyesh leitzitzes bebigdoi, or if a person is wearing tefillin beroishai, mi mifter bekach, doesn't make sense. So answers Tosfos again. I'm scooting down another few lines. Ela vadai loy mifter ela b'sho'ash u oisig ba. And he gives an example. For example, if a person is now busy returning a lost article, talish al aveda. And as we will learn, that even prior to you finding the owner, there are certain things you need to do to the article that you found to make sure that it doesn't get ruined till when you return it. And one of the things you have to do is you have to stretch it out. You have to open it up, air it out. And v'shoitcha litzorcha. Or you have an animal that you found, prior to returning it, you have to feed it. That if while you are doing that action, then an ani comes and he asks you for $1, then is where we say that ha'oisek b'mitzvah pater min ha'mitzvah. Now, in defense of Rashi, it's not that Rashi understands that you don't have to be oisek b'mitzvah. Rashi doesn't say that if you're wearing talos cotton, you're wearing a talos gadol, you're exempt from all the mitzvahs. Rashi holds that if a person would think that while they're going on a trip, so while they're traveling, they can eat. But the moment they rest, they got to build themselves a sukkah, b'shas chaniyasan, they lechatchila won't go on the trip. It's going to hinder their trip. So in such a case, you extend the ha'oiseg b'mitzvah even during the couple of hours that you're taking a rest from the asaka in the mitzvah. Let's go back in the Mishnah. Din number 2. Guys, din number 2 and din number 3, we're going to leave for the following shiurim. Din number 2 in the Mishnah is chulin u'mishamsheyem, u'mishamsheyem p'turim min hasukah. That someone who's ill, and those who are attending to the ill, they are exempt from the sukkah. And din number 3, that oichlin v'shoisen aray chutz l'sukkah. That if you're having what halachically we'll consider the casual meal, a casual drinking session, that is something that is allowed to happen even outside the sukkah. And again, we're going to leave the choylin and the oichlin aray for later, and we're going to focus, the whole daf today is going to be focusing on the shluchei mitzvah, peturim min hasukkah. And again, guys, we understand that shluchei mitzvah, peturim min hasukkah is not a unique din to sukkahs. It's leaning on, it's based on, it's founded on the general rule that ha'oisek b'mitzvah pater min ha-mitzvah. How do you know that from? And there's so many questions on this Gemara, like many people ask, it's a logic. In other words, if we're going to follow what we read in Tosfos, and Nachsei Rashi also subscribes to it generally, if you are occupied in a mitzvah right now, why would you think otherwise? Why would you think, if you can't do 2 mitzvahs at the same time and you are already involved in mitzvah A, then why would you do mitzvah B if you're doing mitzvah A? Now, let's leave that open-ended and we'll come back to it in a moment. So the Tanach Rabbanan, this is the Yisoid. Abraisa is quoting a pasuk that we just read in Parshas V'aschanan. We read it a few times every day, minimally, twice every day. The first portion of the Shema, in which we are speaking about the mitzvah of learning Torah. And when do we do it? B'shivtecha b'veisecha. When you are sitting in your home. So say Chazal, from here we'll see how. Prat lo'oisik b'mitzvah. Now we're speaking about the mitzvah of reading the Shema. I'm sorry, not about learning Torah. And as Rashi writes, b'shivtecha b'veisecha prat lo'oisik b'Torah she'ena chayiv b'kriya Shema. That while that while a person is oisik b'mitzvah, they're not obligated to read the Shema. How do you see that? We'll leave it for the Gemara. Furthermore, here also we learn the same concept, but we extend it. Not only if you are physically occupied in the Mishnah, but even if there's a mental preoccupation. And the example that we will use is a Hassan, and we're speaking specifically about a Hassan who's marrying a psula. And he is preoccupied in the consummation of his marriage, and there is and there's a mitzvah. So the mental preoccupation puts him in the category of ha'oisek b'mitzvah, and he's now exempt from reading the Shema. And just to give everyone a heads up, that what we will learn today, God willing, in this shiur and Daf Chafei Amud Beis, according to Rashi, that there can be other Tanoim, and according to Rashi, there are other Tanoim that do not subscribe to this general rule that ha'oisek b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah. Nevertheless, when it comes to those mitzvahs that are chayvos halavavos, that have a kavana need, like Tefilla, you'll be exempt from Tefilla, not because of the rule ha'oisek b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah, but because you can't have kavana. Whether you apply this to the Shema, if you remember what we learned in Brachas in the beginning, is that when a person says the Shema without kavanah, they also did not fulfill the obligation. But that pasuk has to be repeated. And we learned the Tosfos that says we don't say the same thing by Shemona Esrei, even though theoretically they're all the same. But who says when you'll repeat the Shemona Esrei, you'll have kavanah the second time? Having kavanah by saying the 6 words of Shema is a lot easier. But anyways, over here we are linking the Hassan who's exempt of reading Shema prior to his consummation of the marriage is connected to this general rule that ha'oisek b'mitzvah patur min ha'mitzvah, learned from either b'shiftecha b'veisecha on a physical asaka and uvelechtocha v'derech on a mental asaka. And the Brayso concludes mikan amru that hakohen says apsula, if a man is going to marry, he's marrying a virgin, then patur. However, but if he's marrying a woman that was already married previously, then he's going to be chayv. The Gemara is going to explain the difference. But before we go into the detail, how do you bechlal see from the shiftecha b'veisecha that prat lo oisek b'mitzvah? My mashma. So the Gemara says that indeed you learn it. We're going to begin from u'belechtocha v'derech. Amar Afuna, that u'belechtocha v'derech implies kaderech, like your way, which is when you're going baderech. It means you're going on a reshus trip. How do you know that? We'll see in a moment. Ma derech, the uvelechtocha v'derech is referring to a discretionary trip, reshus. So this traveling, which means reshus, isn't only regarding the trip, but let's go back now to the ubeshiftecha b'veisecha. In other words, everything else mentioned in the pasuk, including b'shiftecha b'veisecha, is only referring to a reshus. So when are you chayv to read the Shema? When you're sitting in your home, is when you're sitting in your home in a discretionary fashion. You are not involved, you're not occupied in a mitzvah. Lafukei hai. But if you have a person that the mitzvah asuk, b'chlal, to such a person, there's no mitzvah to read the Shema. Says the Gemara, 1 second. How do you get that from? You want to say that everything in the pasuk is speaking about the same scenario. Nice. But derech means reshus. How do you know that? What milo yaskinen the causal advar mitzvah? People don't only travel for discretionary reasons. People travel for mitzvah reasons. And yet, the ka'amarachman alikri. So the Gemara says no, because the b'shiftecha uvelechtecha, you that the extra chaf, lying a chaf, is taka not needed. If the pasuk would have been inclusive, both l'reshus and l'mitzvah, the Torah would have used the words b'sheves, while sitting, or ubeleches, while traveling. Why does the Torah say you're sitting? B'shiftecha. Why does the pasuk say belechtecha? Beleches didach. There is who the mechayevet. That is when you're obligated to read the Shema. Habalech is the mitzvah, then petiras. And again, why do you need to have 2 psukim? Why do you have to have b'shivtecha b'veisecha and uvelachlecha v'derech? Because if there only would have been one, then we would have applied the ha'oisik b'mitzvah pata ben mitzvah when you are physically occupied in the mitzvah. When the Torah adds this drasha uvelachlecha v'derech, that's where Chazal add not only when you're oisik physically, even if the asak is mental, you're not doing anything physically, but your mind is preoccupied with a mitzvah, then you are also exempt from another mitzvah. In our case, the example is reading Shema. Hold on. You're also preoccupied in the mitzvah prior to consummating the marriage. So the Gemara says no, it's not. Doesn't work that way. Koines says apsula. When a person is going to marry a psula, then there is a preoccupation, and there is a part of the preoccupation is the worry that she might not be a psula. It's not only about that. He's preoccupied, he's concerned, he wants to make sure that he consummates the marriage properly. She's a psula. If a woman was already previously married, so then you don't have such a preoccupation. Koines es almana, you're not preoccupied prior to the act of consummation, and therefore you're not called oisik. Here clearly, like Tosfos said, regarding an action mitzvah, like Tosfos says, it's only that there's oisik. Clearly, by the mental, the Baraisa says you have to be preoccupied. Hold on. If it's the preoccupation that exempts you, so why don't we say there are many other cases of preoccupations, and it's a non-mitzvah preoccupation. For example, if God forbid a person hears that a ship is sinking in the sea, the stock market is crashing, and those people get preoccupied. And if you're going to tell me it's not true. It's not true. Preoccupations, especially for the Shema. Again, we'll speak out at the end of Chav Heyam and Beis. According to Rashi, Shemana Esrei, mitzvahs that demand a longer amount of focus is something more. It's something harder to demand of people. Saying the Shema, Kavana, Shema Yisrael. No. Now an oval is preoccupied with the suffering. Nevertheless, the rule is that an oval is chayiv with all the mitzvahs that are written in the Torah, other than wearing tefillin. Why tefillin is unique, and why is that? Because since the Torah uses the word pe'er, glory, in regard to tefillin, it's almost disrespectful for a person to don himself in a glorious manner when they lost someone. And more about this on today on Amud Beis. But other than tefillin, you're chayiv in all the mitzvahs. Now, if the tirda will exempt you, an aval is tarut. So the Gemara says, no, it's not just the preoccupation. Over here, we're speaking about someone who's marrying a psula. It's really from when he marries her until he consummates it, then tarid et tirda of a mitzvah. And we mentioned many times the big machlokes rishonim. What exactly is the mitzvah? Is the mitzvah pru'ravu? And being that we are only allowed to fulfill the mitzvah pru'ravu in the context of a marriage, so therefore there's, so to say, as an extension, there's a mitzvah to marry, or like many other rishonim hold, no, there is a mitzvah for itself to be married and to get married. Either way, it's called a tirda the mitzvah. Over there, now these are very strong words. Over there, why the aval, aside of tefillin, and aval is chayv in all the mitzvahs, tared tirda the reshus. There is a preoccupation. The preoccupation is the tsa'ar, let's touch tsa'ar suffering, but that's called the reshus. Chav is very important to Rashi. 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid, tirda the reshus, frekt Rashi, aval, afal pishu chayiv linag avelus. And he gives the dinim. And we're going to learn a lot about this in Moed Katan of Ne'ilah. Ne'ilah means removing leather shoes. There's an isur of having a rechitza of tainug, similar to Yom Kippur. Sicha, anointing oneself. And all of that is laharois kavoid meisai. In other words, Rashi gives 3 examples of behavioral mitzvahs in the negative. You have to refrain, not don't do this, don't do that. All of that is the way that we show covet for the mace. Look inside Rashi. Einoi chayiv lehitztayir. Now, einoi chayiv lehitztayir means there's no mitzvah to suffer. Naturally, people are inside. We're not, God forbid, telling people not to feel pain. But the mitzvah is not the tsar. The mitzvah is the behavior that the aval refrains from l'kvoid meisai. And going back to the Tosfos, Here we're speaking about you're not doing anything. If you're not doing, then you can do another positive mitzvah. Ha'oisik b'mitzvah doesn't mean that you are involved in a mitzvah. It means that you're occupied in a mitzvah in a way that if you would be obligated to do mitzvah 2, you won't be able to do mitzvah number 1. All the negative mitzvahs, you're not doing anything. Not doing doesn't take up any time. You're just not doing. But if it's an issue of mental preoccupation, if there would have been a mitzvah to feel tsar for the loss of a relative, then we would say that the tsar is a mitzvah. You are preoccupied in the tsar, and then taka, you would have been exempt. If the only way of you doing the other mitzvah is to make the extra effort of forgetting about removing your focus on the mitzvah tsar. But since here it's a reshus, so therefore an aval is taka chayv in all the mitzvahs. Gavaldik. Says the Gemara, 4 lines from the bottom, v'ha'oisek b'mitzvah, patur min ha'mitzvah, ma'hacha nafke. Is it from here? I have another source. And as we will see, we have 2 sources, and we need 2 sources. Mahasam nafke, the Tanya, the Parsha of Ba'aloischa. When we learn about the Yidden that were unable halachically to bring the Pesach Rishon, and they came to Moshe Rabbeinu with the Lam and the Gara, and ultimately we were given the mitzvah of Pesach Sheni. So the pasuk writes, says the Braisa, Vayihi anoshim asher hoyu tmeim lenefesh adam v'goymer. There were people that were impure because they were contaminated with corpse tuma. Exactly who were those people? Oisam anoshim mihayu. And here we're going to have a machlokes tanoim. Last line in the Amid. First opinion of Rabbi Yossi Aglili is noisei aroi noishal Yosef hayu. And by the way, we mentioned this many times that we have, perhaps you can even say Bavli Yerushalmi, this question whether halachically the Mishnahs are the same, but there is a shita in the Yerushalmi that tzaddikim do not impart tumah. And from the many chazals that clearly hold otherwise is right over here. Ein loch tzaddik gadol than Yosef, that's called the tzaddik, and not the tzaddik Elyahu. Okay, so that's another whole topic. And we did mention once that there is a Tosfos that quotes the Midrash regarding Elyahu Hanavi helping Yoshua Hagarsi bury the remains of Rabbi Akiva. Don't forget that according to those who hold that Elyahu Hanavi is Pinchas, who's a Kohen, that is the source for the other side. And it was Yoshua Hagarsi that asked Elyahu Hanavi, 1 second, are you not a Kohen? How can you help me bury the remains of Rabbi Akiva? And that is the other source that we find in Chazal. Oh, because Rabbi Akiva is a tzaddik and they don't impart tumah. Bachlal, I'm not even talking about during the burial. That's another topic that we do find in Bavli. In Ashkafta the Rebbe over there in Ksubas, Kov Gimel, Kov Dalid, right, regarding, we had a Tosfos over there regarding can Kohanim participate in a Levaya of the greatest Jew of the generation. There it's regarding the passing of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. If I'm not mistaken, Tosfos speaks about during the passing. And let's go, I don't remember, I think he was speaking about during the passing of the Rabbeinu Tam, that Kohanim were matama themselves. But just to be aware that over here, clearly Yosef HaTzadik imparts Tumah, and those were the ones, the people that were Tameim L'Nefesh Adam were the ones that were busy carrying that Reinish Shal Yosef, so holds Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Daf Chafei Amid Beis. Rabbi Akiva Oimer, no, that wasn't the case. Who were the ones that were Tamei, Mishol and El Safan? And as Rashi tells us from the Sifri, that when Nadav and Avihu passed away, and they passed away on the first day of Nisan, so who were told to bury them? The cousins of Aaron. Look inside the top Rashi. That Hachi Garsinim Bebaraisa B'Sifri, that Rabbi Akiva Oimer, Mishoel Vel Tzafan Hoyu, Shenitmu Ben Nadav Va'Avihu. Back inside the Beraisa. Shoya Oiskim Nadav Avihu. 2 shitas. However, comes along a third opinion. Rabbi Yitzchak Oimer can be, neither of them can be correct. Why? Because im noisei aroi noishal Yosef hayu. When did they have to carry the Aron of Yosef? Only when we were moving in the Midbar. Once we came to a place of rest, to a place of Chanoya, they could have left the Aron Shal Yosef very respectfully in a tent and not go in there. Now guys, let's not forget, now she reminds us to say that Hadvarim, that on the first day of Nisan is when we are almost a year, right? a year minus a month, already camped by Har Sinai. When we got to Har Sinai on 2 months, to Rosh Chodesh Sivan, we were there until the next year, the 20th of Iyar. We were there for a year minus 10 days. The day that the Mishkan was inaugurated, we know this, the Shmini Lameloyim was Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So the Aron Shel Yosef and those who carried the Aron Shel Yosef had a tremendous amount of time before they were not recontaminating themselves, but I'm not done yet. But how were they going to become pure from that tumah? So we know that one of the things that happened on the day of Rosh Chodesh Nisan is that Hashem gave us the Parsha of Paraduma on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And when did we actually, Elazar HaKohen Shech, the first Paraduma, when did we have the ashes to become tired from Tumas Meis on Beis Nisan? It's very important. So, who said that the people that came to Moshe Rabbeinu had ample time to become tahor? So as we will learn a Chazal, that they told Moshe Rabbeinu that we cannot make Pesach by Yom Ahu. Chavre, we had the sugya in Pesachim Daf Tzadik. If you remember, just quickly reminding the soul sugya, if a person is on the 7th day of Tumas Meis, and they did everything right, they underwent all of the sprinklings on the 3rd day and now on the 7th day, and they will become tahor at night. They will become tahor at night. And guys, we're not speaking about nichusrei kapara. There are people that even after they become tahor, but they can't eat kachim until they bring karbonos on the next day. That's not the case of someone who's tamei b'tumas meis. There is no kapara, there's no karbonos that they have to wait for the next day. So if a Jew on the 7th day, right now is still tamei, but once it's dark, they can eat kachim. So we're going to follow the shita that holds that one would have thought, well, you can bring the Korban Pesach on their behalf. Anyways, no one eats the Korban Pesach on the 14th. You can only eat it after it's dark. And after dark, they are allowed to eat it. We're following those who hold it may not be brought for them. And that is exactly the case of the people who are unable to bring the Pesach Rishon. The Torah says that they were unable to bring the Pesach by Yom Ahu. Now, let's think about this. If the people that were tamei were the ones who carried the Aron Shel Yosef from Beis Nisan, you have more than Yud Daled is not the 7th day from Beis Nisan. And the same thing is with the sheet of Rabbi Akiva that it was Mishal and El-Safan. They passed away on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. We bury right away. They were buried on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And again, they also had access to the Ephod of the Potter from Beis Nisan. And they were for sure beyond the 7 days before the 14th. And that wasn't the case of the parsha. Let's read it inside. That's Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak Kaimer, Im Noisei Aron Shel Yosef Hayu, Kfar Hayu Lo Chaylim Li'Toyer, because they had ashes from the 2nd of Nisan. Im Mishal Vel Tzafan Hayu L'Shitas Rabbi Akiva, they also Hayu Chaylim Li'Toyer. Whether they finished contact with the mace when the day they got to Har Sinai, or even if it was Taka Beis Nisan, you have enough time and you have the means of becoming tahor. It must be other people. Who are the other people? When Yidden passed away in the Midbar, so there's a mitzvah to bury them, beginning with their close relatives. Ella, oiskin b'meis mitzvah. Guys, meis mitzvah here doesn't mean what it means in other areas, that you found, so to say, an abandoned corpse. So you, the finder, you have the mitzvah. Here we're speaking about a person passes away, the relatives upon whom does the mitzvah, the schus of bearing the mace fall initially, they are called, that's here, oiskim b'meis mitzvah. So if someone passed away in a way that after you buried him, you right away began the next day, the 7th day count, fine. But there were those people that the 7th day fell out on the 14th. And again, we are following, as we learned in Pesachim, that even though when it comes to the Zman Achilas Pesach, they will be completely tahor, doesn't matter, it's not enough. They have to be tahorim while the Pesach is brought on their behalf. And Sheneman, and that's the pshat, that v'lo yachlu lasois ha-Pesach b'yom ahu. This b'yom ahu is extra. From there, Rabbi Yitzchak is learning, it's only b'yom ahu ein yochaylim lasois. Holam achar, yes, yochaylim lasois. And for them, the parsha was said that what? For them, the parsha was said to bring the Pesach Sheni. What are we saying over here? Based on Rabbi Yitzchak, we have a new source. What's the new source? If someone lost their relative exactly 7 days before the 14th will be the 7th day giving the Shivas Nikiyim. Burial, start the next day and the seventh day. If you would not subscribe to ha'oiseg b'mitzvah pater min ha'mitzvah, the Gemara in the Kasha is suggesting, and we're going to stand by that, the mitzvah of burying the dead is taka gewaldike mitzvah, but not bringing a carbon pesach is a mitzvah for which one gets kares. If not for the rule ha'oiseg b'mitzvah pater min ha'mitzvah, we would have told them, don't bury the dead, don't do this mitzvah, don't become Tamei. Make sure that when Erev Pesach comes, you'll be available, you'll be taught to bring the carbon Pesach. And then burying the dead is based on ha'oiseg b'mitzvah pater min ha'mitzvah. Even though, guys, it's self-understood that that's not exactly the oisig b'mitzvah that we are talking about. Because over there, when they had their relative to bury, at that moment, there was no mitzvah of carbon pesach. Even though you know what's going to happen. If you're going to do the mitzvah right now, even undergoing all of the steps of purification, you won't be taught when the zman chiyuv carbon pesach is chal. We get that. The Gemara is going to speak about that. But it's linked to the concept that since ha'oisik b'mitzvah pater min ha'mitzvah, that's why they fulfilled the mitzvah of doing the mace, even though it meant they're not going to bring the Pesach Rishon, even though at that time we didn't even have the mitzvah of Pesach Sheni, which would have meant that they would have lost that altogether, if not for Hashem giving us the second chance. So be it. Ha'oisik b'mitzvah pater min ha'mitzvah. So since we have that as a source, why do we need to have the source? B'shiftecha u'v'lechtecha, says the Gemara, we need two sources. We have two sources because we need two sources. V'tzricha, because the ashmin and Hassan, if the only source would have been the Pesach, the anachtu tmeim l'nefesh adam, v'lo yachol asas Pesach b'yom hahu, I would argue that taka. Why were they allowed to bury the dead? The loy matez man chiyuv the Pesach. I would have argued because at that moment they were not obligated to bring the Pesach, even though they know that burying the dead will make their bringing impossible Pesach Rishon. So be it. But in a case, abul hached the matez man kriya shema. Let's go back to the case of the Hassan. He got married, and he's preoccupied with consummating the marriage, and that's called a tirda shel mitzvah. Now comes the time of reading the Shema. Maybe over here, right now, Ema, that he cannot say that I'm going to stay focused on my preoccupation. Maybe he has to make this extra effort because it's possible, it's not easy, but it's possible, unpreoccupy yourself and say Shema. Then he's laughing at my English. So that's why it's tzricha. Now let's go in the reverse. If we only would have learned the din of the chassan, the mental preoccupation by the Shema, I would argue, well, over there, this demand is not brought upon the chassan because taka Shema is a mitzvah saseh, and as the Alter Rebbe points out, it's mu'uva shelo yuchal liska, and if a person, God forbid, misses Shema, but there's no kares. But maybe when it comes to the mitzvah of bringing Pesach, guys, this is not before they had the opportunity of Pesach Sheni, maybe one would have said that don't bury the dead. Then, bizoyin hameis, you have a mitzvah to bring the Pesach. You have to have foresight. So that's why you need to have two sources. Atkan, sricha. Now that we quoted Anamad Aleph, we just wanted to bring a proof that any tirda, mental preoccupation per se, doesn't exempt you from the reading the Shema. It has to be a mitzvah tirda. And the example we brought was from an aval. So Gufa we learned above, Amar Rab Ada Bar Zavda in the name of Rav, that an aval is chayiv b'chol mitzvahs amoras b'Torah, aside of tefillin. Not because of mental preoccupation, because since it says Shaharei Nemar Bahem Pe'er, Pe'er means glory. The expression of glory is written regarding tefillin. And you don't, an oval should not go around in that level of glory. And let's get a source for that. The source is, when we will learn Moed Katan, we're not that far away. That will be the source of all the Dinim Avelus, or for many Dini Avelus. What happened there is that Hashem, ben Nevuah, foretold to Yecheskel that his wife, sadly, will pass away. And then Hashem told Yecheskel that he should not behave like mourners behave. And therefore, he should do certain things, including he should wear tefillin. The fact that God told Yecheskel that you should not do what Avelim do. You will lose your wife, but you should put on your tefillin. From there we extrapolate that an Avel normally does not put on tefillin. Chavush means dan, put upon yourself your glory. In other words, at hu de machayvet. This unique hoira shah, so to say, you'll be obligated to wear your tefillin. From there we learn avakul ha'alme indeed are pater. And again, what we're clearly saying is that there's something unique. There's something unique about tefillin, even though an aval is chayv in all the mitzvahs, aside of tefillin. And guys, it's not so simple. Fahane mili that he's not obligated to wear the tefillin. That's only on the first day of burial, first day of death. What happens if there was death and the burial is delayed? This is the big topics. We'll leave all these details from Moed Katan, but there's a lot about this. Because the source of that is, where do we find that there is even a greater, more intense level of mourning on the first day? For sure, the day of the passing is, as it says, Va'acharisa kiyoim mar. And we're using the day of someone's passing as the bitter day, and it's dafke in the singular. And let's leave other dinim of avelos for Moed Katan. Okay, says the Gemara Vayter. Now that we quoted the Rebbe Abba Bar Zavda, another quote, V'amar Abba Bar Zavda Marav. Avel is chayiv in Sukah. Now, a couple of technical things. That if someone, God forbid, lost one of his or her 7 relatives prior to Sukkahs, prior to any Yontif, we know that, then the Yontif stops the Shiva, stops the Avelos. So it must be that we're speaking about someone who lost someone during Yontif. And even though the public laws of mourning begin after Yontif, and the countdown of the 7 days only begins after Yontif, but no one should know about this, but the dinim that are Bitsina, Avelus Bitsina is noig right away. That's what we're talking about. So says Rav that even though he's taking novel, nevertheless he's chayiv in Sukkah. Why would you think otherwise? Why he said that? He was the one that said that an aval is chayiv in all the mitzvahs. And like we had an Amad Aleph, because there's taka tirda, but it's not the tsar, it's a tirda shal reshus. Why would it be exempt? So the Gemara says pshita. Like Rashi writes, we're asking Dafka on himself. Mishnah, 6 lines under the Gemara. Mishnah ha mishad mitzvahs that Ashmi'in and Rav, he already quoted Rav above. The aval chayiv b'kol mitzvahs. Oh, so here Gemara gives a gavaldic answer. Mao the tema you would have thought that Hoyel v'Amar Rav Bar Zavda Marav, another statement in the name of Rav from Rav Bar Zavda, that mitzta'er, someone who's in distress. This is a unique din about a sukkah. Someone who's in distress is patim in a sukkah. Now hold on, where is the tsar coming from is part of the puzzle here that we'll have to focus on. Now an aval has tsar, and there is a unique law when it comes to sukkah. Now this is something that we'll learn more about later, but just to know the source of this halach is based on the concept of teishvu ke'ein toduru. In other words, a person has to live in the sukkah in the manner that you dwell at home. And a home, not a physical house, is where you live comfortably. Uncomfortable, distressed living is no living. And therefore, if someone has tsar and they're dwelling in distress, it's not ke'ein toduru. So mitztayir patim in asukah. And this person, hanami mitztayir hu. And here you can't answer that it's not a tsar shel mitzvah. That mitztayir patim in asukah doesn't mean that the distress is coming from a mitzvah. You're mitztayir. But the tsar is coming from the sukkah. Oh. Says the Gemara Kamash Malan. No, he needed to tell you that an aval is chayiv in the sukkah. That when do we say, and we taka say, this general rule that someone who's in tsar, someone in distress, is exempt from the sukkah. That's when it's tsara de memela. There is some sort of Rashi taichas memela. Not only memela, it's automatic, but memela also is connected that it's an inherent tsar coming from the sukkah, says Rashi. I'm reading inside the Rashi now, 7 lines under the Gemara, that the sukkah brings the distress. For example, it's very hot in the sukkah, or it's very cold in the sukkah, or it smells bad in the sukkah. In other words, that is where we say, it's tired, then you're pater from the sukkah. Back inside the Gemara. Avol hache, but over here, what is bringing tsar? By the fact that he lost a close relative. And again, listen to these words. Wow. He, so to say, is bringing the tzar upon himself because he is able to remove his tzar. He can calm his mind. How can he calm his mind? By not thinking right now about the fact that he's an avel. Now hold on. There's something has to be clarified. If the Gemara began to explain that mitztayir is patir min sukkah only if the tzar is coming from the sukkah, why wouldn't that be enough? That's enough, because his tzar of avelus is not coming from the sukkah. But the Gemara is not making that enough. In other words, what the Gemara is really saying, that even if there is a tzar that's not coming from the sukkah, if you are unable to shake it off, we still will apply that abitztai is patim in sukkah. Even though you can counter-argue what you're going to dwell in your house, you're uncomfortable in your house as well. No. The Gemara has to add, it's like a double-layered thing over here. Memela means you cannot get rid of it. If you have the ability to get rid of your tzar, now we don't say, on the other hand, go into the hot sukkah and figure out how to be comfortable. That we don't say. It's when the tzar is coming from the sukkah, then we always say hamitztayir is patir min sukkah. If the tzar is not coming from the physical sukkah, like in the case of the avel, since on top of that you are able not to focus on it or to focus elsewhere and not feel that level of distress, you are able to eat, drink, sleep in the sukkah, not in distress. Yes, it will be like teishu ke'en taduru. Then you will be obligated to do so, and indeed you are obligated to do so. Let's go weiter. Let's begin the sugya. Hassan, the bridegroom himself. V'hashushvinin doesn't only mean the two people, the couple that's walking him down. The shushvinin means his close friends. And really, v'chol b'nei chuppah. Chuppah is referring to the residence in which the Hassan and Kala moved in there at least for the first week. Many cases that became their home, and whoever went for Sheva Brachas went to that location. The Hassan and Kala were not, kafa kelad here and there. It was a lot more pleasant, and all of that week and everything that happens there is all part of Simchas Hassan v'Kala, which is a mitzvah, and because of that, Pturim min Sukkah kol shiva, based on the rule of ha'oisek b'mitzvah, pater ben ha'mitzvah. My tama, mishum deboy lemechde, because they must rejoice with Hassan Kala. Problem is, so what? Why don't you move the celebration if someone got married? Now here's another important detail, like Rashi will remind us, ein noisim nashim b'moyed. Another din we'll learn in Moed Katan. Fine, the case over here is that they got married prior to Sukkot. So why don't you move the whole celebration in a Sukkah? Answers the Gemara, ein simcha ela b'chuppah. Chuppah here means a residence. And you're not going to have the same amount of simcha. You're not going to have the same amount of simcha if you're in a Sukkah. Okay, so let them eat in the Sukkah, v'lechtu b'chuppah. No, another rule, ein simcha ela b'makim su'udah. Okay, so move everything into the chuppah. You can't do that. Why can't you do that? Abaye says because of yichud. And Ashi says, why is yichud only a problem if you are in a sukkah? It's a technical reason. Rashi writes 6 lines before the bottom of the Amid, that in the times of Chazal, sukkahs were commonly built on rooftops. And therefore you are a little bit removed from the people's comings and goings. And if you're going to have the chassan leaving the sukkah, which is now going to be the whole chuppah, because he has to relieve himself, just for example, there might be someone other than the husband alone with the kala. There might be a violation of yichud. And the solution is dafka not moving the whole celebration into a sukkah, leaving it into a residence. When you leave it into a residence, it's open to the street. And therefore there's no dinei yichud, even if de facto there's right now just a man other than the husband with her. The fact that it's an open area and everyone is able to go in there, and it's probable that someone is going to enter, people in there don't feel that they are secluded. Rava says because of tzar chassan. It's a tzar chassan to make him move the whole chuppah into a sukkah. Why is it a tzar? So Rashi says like this, that a chassan and kala need privacy. And as we keep on mentioning, the types of sukkahs that were built in the times of Chazal, they were fully opened on one side. And those types of behaviors that a chassan would only engage in, if he feels he's living in privacy, he will not do if it's open on one side. I'm reading inside the Rashi. First of all, it's smaller. Second of all, it's opened. The widest lines in the Rashi. This is clearly that if you have a sukkah that like today's sukkahs, that's different. But if it's open on one side, he's embarrassed to interact with the skala in a way that he would not do so in public. So either yichud or because of the tzad of the chassan, you can't demand of them to move everything into the sukkah. And what's the nafkamina? The sukkah was always going to be open on one side. But there were scenarios where many people became the bnei chuppah, and even when you're doing it on the gag, it's highly unlikely that there will be only another man with a kala. There are many people in there. So if the issue is only because of yichud, then you would demand of moving the entire chuppah into the sukkah. Lamanda Amar, it's because of tzar chassan, since it's an open, sukkahs were opened, so then you would still keep the din that we learned right now, that not only the chassan and not only the shoshvinin, but all of the bnei chuppah, they are exempt from this. This is not connected to consummating the marriage, because then once the marriage is consummated, the chassan is chayiv to read the Shema. And as we learned in Ksubas and in other places, that even if he did not consummate it for 4 days, there is a limit, and afterwards he has to go back to the Shema regardless. Now,
Rabbi,
yes.
Can you explain one thing here? I don't understand this answer about Abaye and Nishum Yichud, because even if they weren't in the sukkah, if they were in the house, you still have all these Shushminim guys that are supposedly also public from sukkahs. So why are you not worried about Yichud in the house?
Because the chassan doesn't go down from the roof, so he's much closer by, and it's a lot easier for people to enter. And therefore, this is dinam and yichud. That means that if you are in a room alone with there's a technical yichud, but other people can easily at any moment enter, then there's no yichud. Even though we leave the door a little bit open, that's beyond the letter. But on the roof, we don't say that. It takes time to get up on the roof. Mastama, you can hear people coming up, which gives the people there a forewarning.
And the idea is that there was only one Shushminim guy. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of them.
Well, not for the whole week. Not at night. Okay, weiter. Amar Abzeda, let's chaparein. It's important. Amar Abzeda, I want you to know that what? Ano ochli b'sukkah. That I eat in the sukkah. And v'chadi b'chuppah. And let me tell you something. Not only does it not diminish my joy, I have joy by the fact that I'm doing 2 mitzvahs. I'm married, I'm a sameach, chassan v'kala, and I'm doing the mitzvah. The kol shchein dechadoy liboy. Why? The kovid natarte. Gevaldik, living inside Rashi, shtei mitzvahs, sukkah mitzvahs nesuyin. Now, when did he get married? Here's where Rashi writes it out. He got married eref haregel. B'toich haregel, you can't get married, as we learn in Moed Katan, the einois noshim b'moed. In other words, this becomes subjective. When you're telling that you don't want to bring tzad, and I'm at stayed part of minasukah, itaka, we know today you can argue both ways. Some people say, I don't have to sleep in the sukkah because mitztayir. Other people say, why are you mitztayir? You should be happy that you're fulfilling a mitzvah. Okay, and now it's important. I want to learn weiter because Rashi, unlike other Rishonim, we're in the second to last line, clearly hold that this Tana rejects the ganze oisik b'mitzvah patur ben hamitzvah. Yet, even if you don't subscribe to Ha'isik b'mitzvah patur ben hamitzvah, yet on the Rabbanon, Hassan, and the Shushvinin, and not only the Shushvinin, but the bnei chuppah, they are exempt from Tefilla. That's a new din. Not because you cannot, because you are unable to do Tefilla. Generally, mitzvahs, of course, be focused on the mitzvah. But if you didn't focus on the mitzvah, you fulfill the mitzvah. Prayer, if you don't have the minimum amount of kavanah, you don't do the mitzvah. It's because you are unable to do it. The boy kavanah, back. And they are exempt of tefillin, not because they're oisik b'mitzvah, But because since de facto in that environment people are drinking and there's a lot of levity, says Rashi, the shchicha shichrus, the kalus roish, one may not be in that state, so you prevent people violating the kedusha of tefillin. Don't put it, last line in Rashi, because even though krishma like tefillah demands kavana, but by tefillah, by the level of kavanah that you're standing in front of God, you have to have for the whole Shemona Esrei. Even knowing the meaning of every word, you have to have for the first bracha. That's a lengthy kavanah. Krishma only demands minimally for the first pasuk. The mitzvah's kavanah, so says Rashi, Einoi ela b'pasuk rishoin. For that, v'yecholim liyashev datun shoktana k'dei likra pasuk rishon. Now, if you subscribe chevra to ha'oisik b'mitzvah pater ben ha'mitzvah, we wouldn't say that. This Braisa doesn't hold to ha'isik b'mitzvah pater ben ha'mitzvah. So the reason why we have these exemptions is because you are unable, mitzvahs that demand kavana. So when it comes to Shema, we say you are able. You are able. Focus on the mitzvah of Shema. Daf chavav. Umishum Rab Sheila Amru, that Hassan, only the Hassan is pater, and we are dafka speaking, my friends, about Kriya Shema. But the Shushvinin and the Bnei Achupa, they're going to be chayiv. They're going to be chayiv. So he argues with the Tanakama who says that everyone is chayiv. Rab Sheila says the Chassan is pater. And again, read inside the Rashi. Mishum Rab Sheila Amru Chassan pater mikriya Shema the Tarid, v'shar Bnei Achupa chayavim, and v'leis lohu lahani tanoi. Side Rab Sheila, side the Tanakama, they do not subscribe to ha'isik b'mitzvah pater ben ha'mitzvah. It's very important, this. In other words, if you would subscribe to ha'isik b'mitzvah pater ben ha'mitzvah, you wouldn't say that they're chayiv, because they're ha'isik b'mitzvah. Are they able to focus on Shema? Yes, but they're not obligated to do so. Only if you don't subscribe to ha'isik b'mitzvah pater ben ha'mitzvah, yet, the mitzvahs that demand kavana, which is tefillah, is something that you're going to be exempt from. So I be exempt from Shema. Again, we have this concept that since the minimum obligation of having kavana is only during the first pasuk, going back, just quoting the Tosfos we learned in Brachas, halacha l'maisa, that if a person nowadays reads the Shema and they realize after they read the Shema that their mind was not there, they have to repeat the Shema. If a person davens the Shemona Esrei and they were not having the minimum amount of kavana while they were saying the Shemona Esrei, theoretically they have to repeat the Shemona Esrei, but practically they do not do so, because who says you'll have kavana the second time around, and that will be a bracha levatala. No, there's something unique about the Shema simply because of its brevity that enables even people with a lesser of a mental power to make the effort and have kavanah. And since, again, Rashi, both of the Tanoim hold that this Tana does not subscribe, these Tanoim don't subscribe to ha'isik b'mitzvah mitzvah, so therefore there's a chiyuv of Kriya Shema. The only question is, who are you being mechayev? And Rashi and Rab Sheila holds that the Chassan is so preoccupied that you can't demand of him to have kavanah even for the pasuk rishon, so the Chassan is pater. To be continued.